Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. During the winter of 1860 to 1861, following the election of Abraham Lincoln as president, as the seceded and loyal states drifted further apart, and as the flames of disunion crept ever closer to the fuse that would ignite a keg built by partisan politics and filled with animus, former Army officer and Mexican War veteran turned family businessman Ulysses S. Grant trekked through towns in southwest Wisconsin, southeast Minnesota, and northeast Iowa. Some people knew him or learned about him, and they stopped by public houses to strike up conversations with Grant about the state of the country. It's easy to imagine the plainly dressed Grant, his reddish beard and slightly turned brow bathed in pipe smoke, chatting up locals to a late hour, opining on the future of the country. War? No war? Who started it? How did it come to this? Why? 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 Grant remembered his travels in his personal memoirs written almost a quarter century after those memorable visits to the upper Midwest. In his memoirs, he shared his thoughts on the questions of great import that dominated the national conversation during those precarious months between secession and war. Grant wrote, "There is little doubt in my mind now that the prevailing sentiment of the South would have been opposed to secession in 1860 and 1861 if there had been a fair and calm expression of opinion, unbiased by threats, and if the ballot of one legal voter had counted for as much as that of any other. But there was no calm discussion of the question. Demagogues who were too old to enter the army if there should be a war, others who entertained so high an opinion of their own ability that they did not believe they could be spared from the direction of the affairs of state in such an event, declaimed vehemently and unceasingly against the North, against its aggressions upon the South, its interference with Southern rights, etc., etc. They denounced the Northerners as cowards, poltroons, Negro worshippers, claimed that one Southern man was equal to five Northern men in battle, that if the South would stand up for its rights, the North would back down. Mr. Jefferson Davis said in a speech delivered at LaGrange, Mississippi, before the secession of that state, that he would agree to drink all the blood spilled south of the Mason and Dixon's line if there should be a war. The young men who would have the fighting to do in case of war believed all these statements, both in regard to the aggressiveness of the North and its cowardice. They too cried out for separation from such people. The great bulk of the legal voters of the South were men who owned no slaves. Their homes were generally in the hills and poor country. Their facilities for educating their children, even up to the point of reading and writing, were very limited. Their interest in the contest was very meager. What there was, if they had been capable of seeing it, was with the North. They too needed emancipation. Under the old regime, they were looked down upon by those who controlled all the affairs in the interest of slave owners as poor white trash who were allowed the ballot so long as they cast it according to direction. I am aware that this last statement may be disputed, and individual testimony perhaps adduced to show that in antebellum days the ballot was as untrammeled in the South as in any other section of the country. But in the face of any such contradiction, I reassert the statement. The shotgun was not resorted to. Masked men did not ride over the country at night intimidating voters, but there was a firm feeling that a class existed in every state with a sort of divine right to control public affairs. If they could not get this control by one means, they must by another. The end justified the means. The coercion, if mild, was complete. There were two political parties, it is true, in all the states, both strong in numbers and respectability, but both equally loyal to the institution which stood paramount in Southern eyes to all other institutions in state or nation. The slave owners were the minority, but governed both parties. Had politics ever divided the slaveholders and the non slaveholders, the majority would have been obliged to yield, or internecine war would have been the consequence. I do not know that the Southern people were to blame for this condition of affairs. There was a time when slavery was not profitable, and the discussion of the merits of the institution was confined almost exclusively to the territory where it existed. The states of Virginia and Kentucky came near abolishing slavery by their own acts, one state defeating the measure by a tie vote, and the other only lacking one. But when the institution became profitable, all talk of its abolition ceased where it existed, and naturally, as human nature is constituted, arguments were adduced in its support. The cotton gin probably had much to do with the justification of slavery. The winter of 1860 to 61 will be remembered by middle-aged people of today. Remember, it's 1880s, as one of great excitement. South Carolina promptly seceded after the result of the presidential election was known. Other southern states proposed to follow. In some of them, the Union sentiment was so strong that it had to be suppressed by force. Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, and Missouri, all slave states, failed to pass ordinances of secession, but they were all represented in the so-called Congress of the so-called Confederate States. The governor and lieutenant governor of Missouri in 1861, Jackson and Reynolds, were both supporters of the rebellion and took refuge with the enemy. The governor soon died, and the lieutenant governor assumed his office, issued proclamations as governor of the state, was recognized as such by the Confederate government, and continued his pretensions until the collapse of the rebellion. The South claimed the sovereignty of states, but claimed the right to coerce into their confederation such states as they wanted. That is, all the states where slavery existed. They did not seem to think this course inconsistent. The fact is, the Southern slave owners believed that, in some way, the ownership of slaves conferred a sort of patent of nobility, a right to govern independent of the interest or wishes of those who did not hold such property. They convinced themselves, first, of the divine origin of the institution, and next, that the particular institution was not safe in the hands of anybody, of legislators, but themselves. Meanwhile, the administration of President Buchanan looked helplessly on and proclaimed that the general government had no power to interfere, that the nation had no power to save its own life. Mr. Buchanan had in his cabinet two members at least who were as earnest, to use a mild term, in the cause of secession as Mr. Davis or any Southern statesman. One of them, Floyd, the Secretary of War, scattered the army so that much of it could be captured when hostilities should commence, and distributed the cannon and small arms from northern arsenals throughout the South so as to be on hand when treason wanted them. The Navy was scattered in like manner. The president did not prevent his cabinet preparing for war upon their government, either by destroying its resources or storing them in the South until a de facto government was established, with Jefferson Davis as its president and Montgomery, Alabama, as the capital. The secessionists had then to leave the cabinet. In their own estimation, they were aliens in the country which had given them birth. Loyal men were put into their places. Treason and the executive branch of the government was stopped, but the harm had already been done. The stable door was locked after the horse had been stolen. During all the trying winter of 1860 to 61, when the Southerners were so defiant that they would not allow within their borders the expression of a sentiment hostile to their own views, it was a brave man indeed who could stand up and proclaim his loyalty to the Union. On the other hand, men at the North, prominent men, proclaimed that the government had no power to coerce the South into submission to the laws of the land. That if the North undertook to raise armies to go south, these armies would have to march over the dead bodies of the speakers. A portion of the press of the North were constantly proclaiming similar views. When the time arrived for the president elect to go to the capital of the nation to be sworn into office, it was deemed unsafe for him to travel, not only as president elect, but as any private citizen should be allowed to do. Instead of going in a special car, receiving the good wishes of his constituents at all the stations along the road, he was obliged to stop on the way and to be smuggled into the capital. There is little doubt that he would have been assassinated if he had attempted to travel openly throughout his journey. So there you have the thoughts and the reflections of Ulysses S. Grant of those heady times, those precarious times, those moments when the country was teetering on the brink of disaster. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.